1% rule is dead in Bryan and College Station. At least that's what you would think if you were to look on our current houses listed on the market today. You would assume there's no way here in Bryan and College Station you can achieve the 1% rule, but I'm gonna tell you that's not correct. First, I'm gonna tell you exactly what the 1% rule is. Then I'm gonna tell you how to achieve the 1% rule, how my clients are doing it every single day. And lastly, I'm gonna answer a bonus content question from a client that goes something like this. Should I even give a damn about the 1% rule? We're gonna cover all of that and more on this week's episode of Investing in Bryan and College Station, where I cover everything about growing your wealth through real estate in my favorite towns of Bryan and College Station, Texas. Guys, stay tuned. This is gonna be a good one. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, my name is Greg Schwartz. I am an investor here in Bryan and College Station. In fact, I've been investing here for the last 5 years. My wife and I started off our journey by buying a fourplex and house hacking it. That means that we lived in one of the units and rented out the rest. We now have a portfolio of over 25 units, everything from long-term to short-term rentals. I was also a property manager in town for a number of years, where I managed a portfolio of 150 units. Lastly, today as a full-time job, I'm a real estate agent that helps investors grow their wealth through investment properties here in Bryan and College Station. So I know my way around town, I know my way around rental properties, and I know my way around the 1% rule, which brings us to our first topic. What is the 1% rule? And that's a great question. Well, as I define it, the 1% rule is a very rough rule of thumb to help you determine whether or not a long-term buy and hold rental property will likely cash flow. Now, mathematically, what the 1% rule says is that the rent rate needs to be equal or greater to 1% of the purchase price. For example, if you were to buy a median priced house here in Bryan and College Station, you're probably spending around $300,000. In order for that same house to meet the 1% rule, it would need to rent for $3,000 a month. $3,000 is 1% of $300,000. And that's a great rule. But guys, over the years, I've added a little twist to the 1% rule. I've added my own little spice in there because I started doing value add properties, and it was hard for a value add property to meet the 1% rule because I have to factor in the renovations. So now what I say is that the after repair market rent, so that's the potential rent of the property, needs to be equal to or greater than the purchase price plus the rehab. I'll give you a quick example. Let's assume that I'm looking at a house for $200,000 that needs $100,000 in renovations. $200,000 plus $100,000 is $300,000. So again, that property now needs to have the potential to rent for $3,000 when I'm done with that renovation. Guys, this is very important because we're about to jump into the next segment of this video, which is where can you find or make a 1% rule here in Bryan and College Station. So where do you find this elusive 1% rule? Well, guys, for the most part, if you're looking for 1% rules on the MLS, on Zillow, on Realtor.com, you're probably going to be looking at multifamily. One of your best options will be fourplexes. We do have a lot of fourplexes in town. Most of them were built in the 80s, and usually they're 2-bedroom units. These will rent out from right around $1,000 to $1,100 a month, and times 4, that means that you're bringing in $4,400 a month plus or minus. And these are selling for between $400,000 and $500,000. So you're pretty dang close to the 1% rule. But the truth is, even with that asset, you're probably having to do some upgrades. You're probably putting in $5,000 to $15,000 per unit. So really, we're gonna be nudging ourselves outside of that 1% rule when you factor in the renovations required. If you don't want to do so much of a heavy renovation, there's another option. That's a 2000s built duplex. These things are built between 1999 and about 2005. They sell for right around $380,000 to $400,000, and rents are between $1,600 and $1,800 per side. I had a client get $1,800 per side, which means he's bringing in $3,600 on an asset that he bought for $400,000. It's pretty close to the 1% rule, considering he didn't have to do any renovations to make that deal work. Lastly, we have our 80s built duplexes. These are a pretty good option, particularly for that renovation I was telling you about. So there is currently a house listed on the MLS. I'm looking at it right now. It's 1527 Pine Ridge Drive. It's listed at $225,000. Now, if you put some sweat equity into it, $10,000 per side means you have a total renovation budget of around $20,000. So your all in is $240,000. We'll round up to $250,000. Now, it's not impossible to get $1,200 to $1,300 per side. Of course, if we got $1,250, we're bringing in $2,500 in total rent, which now means that we hit the 1% rule with a deal currently listed on the MLS. But the truth is, if you want to find 1% rules, guys, you're either going to have to do value add, like I said, or you're likely going to have to look off market. That's right. Unfortunately, the way the market is right now, the deals that hit the MLS get the highest price. They are bid up, and there's lots of competition for a good investment here in Bryan and College Station. So really, if you want to hit that 1% rule, I recommend that you start looking off market, wholesalers, direct to seller marketing, even something as simple as getting on Facebook and joining some of the groups out there where people post deals that are being sold, Facebook Marketplace, things like that. Case in point for that, I had a gentleman, it was about 2 years ago, so this is 2022, who came to me. He was looking to sell his house. It was a fairly small house, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, under 1,000 square feet, and we ended up buying it from him for $110,000. Now, I ended up putting about $30,000 in renovation into this house, so I'm all in at $140,000, and wouldn't you believe it, we rented it out for $1,400. All that was possible because it was an off-market deal. In fact, he was originally asking $130,000, but because I didn't have any competition, because it wasn't listed on the MLS, I was able to negotiate the seller down to $110,000. Ultimately, he walked away with a cash deal. I walked away with a great property, and now my tenants have a great place to live. That's how you construct an off-market 1% deal here in Bryan and College Station, even in this competitive market. All right, guys, it is time for the bonus content, our client question. And the client question is actually one I get pretty common. When I send out deals to my clients, they respond with, Greg, this deal doesn't even meet the 1% rule. I don't think it's a good investment. Oh, that burns me, guys, because I don't think that the 1% rule is worth a dang for determining whether or not a property is a good investment. There's 2 reasons for that. Number one, I told you when I defined it, the 1% rule is a rule of thumb. It is a rough rule of thumb. It doesn't take into account all the nuances of cash flow to a property. For example, it doesn't take into account vacancy. We talked about market rent, but we didn't talk about whether or not a fourplex would have more vacancy than a single family home, or whether a town like Bryan and College Station would have less vacancy than a town like Memphis, Tennessee. You see, here in Bryan and College Station, with all the students and the ability to pre-lease, I see very low vacancy rates in my clients and my personal portfolio. Very rarely do we have a house sit vacant. What about expenses? We talked about how a fourplex is probably the closest thing to a 1% rule you can get here in Bryan and College Station, but we didn't talk about is all of the additional capital expenses that come with a fourplex. For example, you have 4 air conditioners. 4 air conditioners times $7,000 per air conditioner comes out to, I don't know, $28,000 worth of HVAC in that house. Guys, that is way more expensive than the $7,000 to $8,000 HVAC that's in a 1,500 square foot single family house. So yes, the single family house is way further away from the 1% rule, but you also have 1/3 or 1/4 the AC repairs and eventual replacements. Those numbers add up, but they're not incorporated. They're not taken into account with the 1% rule. Guys, and the number 2 reason why I don't like the 1% rule, this could be the only reason to not use the 1% rule, and that's this. It only addresses cash flow, which is great if you're in a cash flow market, but we are in a hybrid market. What I mean by that is we can find houses that cash flow or break even, but still the majority of your return is going to be through appreciation. Let me make a point here for you. Let's assume we could find a $300,000 house that would rent out for $3,000 a month. maybe you crush it with that house. This is a absolutely out of this world deal, and you make $500 of cash flow after the debt every single month. That means you make $6,000 a year on that property. This would be a grand slam, absolute home run of a deal, and you make $6,000 a month. Now, take that same house and let's apply the appreciation. Our average appreciation in Bryan and College Station has been 4.96% for the last 30 years. Median appreciation, look it up. For simple math, I'm going to use 5%. 5% times $300,000 is $15,000. Guys, that's nearly 3x what we're getting in the cash flow on this Grand Slam deal, which means we fought to find the best cash flowing house in all of Bryan College Station. And we did all this work to find the cash flow, and it turns out that our appreciation 3x'd that. And the appreciation happens on every single house. A cash flowing house, a non-cash flowing house, a great 1% rule or not, you're still getting that appreciation. So do you want to buy one house every 4 years because you're going to really fight for that 1% rule? Or do you want to buy a house every single year and enjoy $15K of appreciation every single year on every single house, which by the way goes up with compounding interest? Guys, that's why I'm so passionate about not using the 1% rule. I'll leave it with this. I do look at properties in terms of the rent rate to purchase price and that ratio. So yes, I do in a way look at that, but that's simply to see if we're even close. Because I already can tell you right now, if the house is asking $400,000 and only rents out for $2,000, it's not even be close to cash flow. It's not going to be close to break even, so I'm not going to touch it. But I don't give a darn if it actually meets the 1% rule, and I don't think you should either. Lastly, guys, I want to ask you a few favors. Number one, like. Number two, comment. Number three, subscribe. And number four, until next week, take it easy.